What many have referred to as the controversial early release scheme has begun. Welcome back to Riks Europe, Paul Embery, trade unionist and writer.
Good to be back with you, thank you.
There's plenty of viral footage of some of these early releases. Could you just once again give the viewers a brief kind of summary of what this is about, but also the reactions of these early releases?
Yeah, so essentially the prison estate in the UK is falling apart. It's creaking under the weight of so many prisoners, and we just don't have, so we are told, the necessary spare capacity within the prison estate to be able to accommodate new prisoners, which means that a whole stream of prisoners are now being released before essentially they should be, before they were otherwise supposed to be released. And so we've seen the spectacle of some of these prisoners celebrating because they've been let out of prison early. And naturally the media turned up to many of our high profile prisons and waited outside the gates to spot the prisoners being released, and lots of the prisoners were very pleased, of course. I think there's already been stories of some of them reoffending and possibly being called back to prison, but it hasn't been received particularly well by the public. The public already get quite angry that prisoners don't serve their full sentence, that often they're released after sending half of their sentence, and now many of them are going to be released even before that. And the scenes that we've seen in the media of these releases have caused quite a bit of anger.
And you mentioned the reoffenders, and obviously I'm sure this was taken into consideration, the possibilities or the risks of that. But now that it's actually happening, is there talks of any changes in this?
No, I don't think there will be any changes. Obviously, if there were an incident, a really serious incident, where someone who was released early under this plan ended up committing an extremely serious crime, then obviously that will cause a huge amount of controversy, I think. So I imagine everybody's hoping that doesn't happen. There is a wider question here. I mean, there's no doubt that there are huge problems with our infrastructure within the prison estate, that we haven't created enough prison places, we haven't built enough prisons, and the prisons are under enormous pressure. So I think it would be unfair to lay complete blame at what's happened at the door of the Labour government, which obviously only came in July. So we do need to examine those wider questions about why we are failing as a country, not just on prisons, but on all sorts of things. We don't build enough houses, our energy supply is insecure. We've got massive waiting lists within our National Health Service, all sorts of problems around our infrastructure and planning, that kind of thing. And prisons really is just part of that. I do think there's also the question around what we're seeing in terms of selective tough justice. Following the recent riots that we had in Britain, we saw people moved through the criminal justice system very quickly and imprisoned for lengthy sentences, which in some cases I think some people thought were extremely harsh, even though what some people had done was completely wrong. They were sent to prison for a long time, and some people think the whole thing has been a little bit selective, that the people in the riots have been treated more harshly than ordinary everyday criminals who cause misery to people's lives and to neighbourhoods, and they rob and they burgle houses and so on. They commit violent crime, and sometimes these people don't even go to jail. They're let off with suspended sentences or with community orders and so on. So that whole thing, I think, is creating a lot of resentment within the country.
You mentioned it a little bit there. Is there still talk of this sort of double standard, if you will, that there's an early release of prisoners to make space for young people who took place in these riots, some of them seemingly done very little, some obviously more, as you said, but also making space for people who have made controversial statements online. Do people still talk about that sort of double standard, or are people angry about that?
There's certainly that perception of a double standard. I mean, I don't think we can. I don't think we can pitch it as crudely as saying that people have been released to make space for people who took part in the riots. These people would have been released anyway. That was the plan, to release these people because of the pressure on prison spaces. So it's certainly not straightforward as saying they've been let out so people who took part in the riots could be put in prison. But certainly people do sense that there is a real imbalance at the heart of our justice system where, as you say, people have been imprisoned for saying nasty things online, impetuous things online, in some cases pretty horrible things. We do need to be clear about that. But nonetheless, things that it's hard to argue, I think, that anybody took seriously as incitement in some cases, and that were not really likely ever to be acted upon. And in some cases, the statements were quickly deleted and what have you. And yet, in these cases, people have been sent to prison for over a year, for 15 months. In one particular case, a woman, a 53-year-old full-time carer, Julie Sweeney, put something horrible on Facebook about blowing up a mosque. It was, as I understand it, fairly swiftly deleted. She was apologetic about it. She posted the statement in the wake of the murders that had taken place in Southport. I don't think there was any likelihood anyone was going to react to it. But as I say, she's been sent to prison for 15 months. And there is no doubt that when you look at the treatment of someone like her, for example, and I stress again, I don't condone what she did, not for 1 second, but if you look at her, for example, and the fact that people who actually cause real misery to their communities, people who commit really serious, crimes in terms of, physically attacking people, sometimes don't go anywhere near a jail. And that's selective. So I'm in favour of tough justice, but I don't want to see selective tough justice. I don't want to see the double standards that we've seen. And people are grasping that there is an element of that. And I think that does need to be addressed.
And to shift focus towards Labour, this is a Labour scheme, if I understand correctly. Their popularity is said to be at an all-time low in the polls. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Well, the Labour government won a landslide in July, but it was what one political commentator called a loveless landslide, which I think is an accurate way of describing it. The Conservative Party, the Conservative government was so despised, and so many people just wanted to get rid of it, and they realised that the only realistic alternative was the Labour Party, that people voted for the Labour Party without actually having a great deal of affection for it. So the term loveless landslide, I think, is an accurate one. And I've kind of said that this is nothing like a 1997 moment. And what I mean by that is, as you'll know, in 1997, Tony Blair was elected as a Labour Prime Minister. He also won a landslide after 18 years of Conservative government. And there was, I think, quite a lot of affection for that Labour Party. There was a great feeling of optimism at the time. Blair had a very long honeymoon period, had record-breaking levels of support. I said before this election that even though I thought Labour would win it comfortably, that we would find fairly quickly that there wouldn't really be a honeymoon period, and that there wasn't that sort of affection for this Labour Party that there was for the Labour Party in 1997. And I think that's been proven accurate, really. And I think some of the decisions that it has taken hasn't helped the situation. It scrapped the Rwanda scheme, for example, the processing of asylum seekers in Rwanda and the detention of them there without actually replacing it with anything else. So people feel that one of the most pressing issues of concern in Britain today isn't going to be addressed by the Labour government because they've got no real serious plan to deal with it quickly. the response to the riots, where they took a very simplistic attitude. They said it's all about the far right and one or two malicious actors on social media, without really delving deeper into some of the real issues of resentment that have been burning in some of our communities for a long time over economic justice and integration issues and immigration issues and so on. And with this early release scheme as well, I think that's angered a lot of people. Also, I think with Rachel Reeves as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, essentially following an austerity programme like the Conservative government, the coalition government under David Cameron did in 2010, saying actually we need to make cuts. There's been a cut to pensioners' winter fuel allowance and other things that the government are saying that they will need to do in terms of cutting back public services and so on. And Labour was elected because people wanted to see a change to that economic approach, because they'd suffered many years of austerity and financial hardship and a cost of living crisis. And Labour now just seems to have resorted to Treasury orthodoxy without any real idea how to spark growth and increase prosperity across the economy. So there's a sense on the economy that things haven't really changed and there's no hope being delivered by Labour. So unless some of that changes radically in the next few weeks and months, I foresee that there's going to be some real problems with this Labour government in terms of the popularity. I think that the polls could sink even lower for Labour unless it really gets a grip on some of those issues.
Thank you so much, Paul Embery, trade unionist and writer.
Pleasure, thank you.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.